Hello again and welcome to another Mordian Glory bolt action video. In today's episode we are going to be casting our ever critical eye over another bolt action unit. Last week we looked at the Panzer I, a small yet mighty armoured vehicle. However, this time we're returning to form and we're going to have a look at a big old German tank. In fact, one of the biggest tanks that you can field in your games of bolt action. I'm of course talking about the Jagdtiger, also known as the Hunting Tiger. And so, without further ado, let's go through the good, the bad, and the ugly of this powerful weapon of war. As is tradition, let's begin with a brief overview of what the hell this unit actually is. The Jagdtiger was the heaviest and most powerfully armed of all the German tank destroyers of World War II, and unsurprisingly, it's got a points cost to reflect that. You can take this unit as either inexperienced at 448 points or regular at 560 points. What I find really interesting about this is it differs significantly from the other big German tanks, for example the Tiger I and the Tiger II. Both of those can be taken as regular, but they can be taken as veteran, whereas the Jagdtiger can't, and also the Tiger I and the Tiger II cannot be taken as inexperienced. I don't know necessarily why that is. I'm sure there will be some historical precedent, and if you are aware of that, please let me know down in the comment section. I always love learning a little bit more about history. My guess is, with this thing being its principal service in 1945 and only 77 of them being made, maybe at that point all of the tank crews were fairly inexperienced, or what was available was inexperienced. But interestingly, it does differ from those other units. However, whilst it might differ on paper, the reality is you're probably going to take this as regular, like you would for almost any of your big German vehicles. And the reason that you go for regular is because you don't want to have this unit as inexperienced, and the reason you don't want it to be experienced is because then you -1 to hit and you've got lower leadership. So your one shot big gun, which we're getting into later, it only gets about 6 or 7 shots, so it's hitting at a permanent -1, and then you've got cover and stuff in it. Well, you don't want this thing hitting on 64x6s every turn. It'll be a nightmare. So you want to avoid that, and you need to do it needs to do as it's told. And so you need that leadership so that if you do have to do an order test, it's actually got a chance of passing it. On top of that, if this unit gets hit by something that can't penetrate its armor but has a penetration value, you'll want that 4+ to try and ignore the pins. If you don't have it, then again, it's going to get pinned up very quickly. Those pin markers will translate into it being even harder for it to hit anything. And the 400, the 56, the 100 points that you save, taking this as inexperienced, 448 versus 560, very quickly you're going to wish you'd spent those 100 points. But moving on from its cost to its weapons, the Jagdtiger is equipped with one casemate mounted forward-facing super heavy anti-tank gun. Wow, there are a lot of hyphens in that weapon. Oh my days. Super heavy anti-tank gun means it has a penetration value of +7. So even medium vehicles will be penetrated on a 2+, which is pretty nice. And it also has a forward-facing hull-mounted medium machine gun. But those are the only weapons it has. It doesn't have a coaxial machine gun or a pintle-mounted weapon or anything like that. It's just got the very powerful super heavy anti-tank gun, and it's also got a medium machine gun which will help it a little bit with dealing with infantry. The only issue you might have is if you're getting swarmed by some infantry that are dug into cover. You can't do what a lot of German tanks do, which is just switch to double MMG and hose them down and try to get some pins on them. You are going to be firing this super heavy tank gun whether you want to or not. We've then got a damage value of 11+, making it a super heavy tank. Oh, that's very tasty. There is something special about putting a super heavy on the board. It just means that your tank is probably not going to die. I mean, it might do. There's always big penetrating shots. There's always things that can go through the front of a tank and out the back. But Bear in mind, if you're being shot at by a medium anti-tank gun and it's shooting you over half range, then that medium AT gun can't physically penetrate your armor. Because even though the medium AT gun is 10 plus 5, over half range, it gets -1 to its pen value. That's pen plus 4, so even if you roll a 6, you can't even glance this thing. Even if you're in half range, the best you can do is glance it. And in order to get a penetrating hit, you're going to need to get shots on the side armor. So super heavy tanks are really, really tough. The way that most people deal with them is to try and pin them up with things like HE and stuff. But if this is regular, even if it gets hit on the top armor by something like a mortar, which would normally get like +1 to 10, it's still not going to be able to penetrate the armor, and you'll still have that chance in a 4+ to ignore pins from the HE. So, in fact, most HE will have a difficult time penetrating the armor of this thing, even if it hits it on the front or anything, just because of it being a super heavy tank. So you're somewhat resilient to HE as long as you can make those 4-ups, and you're very resilient to anti-tank weapons from knocking you out. The big thing though is the fact that you've got that forward facing. It's a casemate anti-tank gun. And the Jagdtiger it's a big tank. It's quite a long tank, and so you may find that unlike a turreted tank like the Tiger 2, which can keep its front armor facing where it needs to whilst turning its turret in another direction, but it's protected and it's also doing the damage. With the casemate version, you're going to have to turn the tank to shoot stuff. And that does mean that if you're getting pincered by a couple of anti-tank options, maybe your opponent's got a tank and an armoured car, maybe your opponent has got a bazooka team, a medium anti-tank gun, and a Piat team, or some other kind of mobile infantry anti-tank weapon. The point is, you might find that if you're facing 2 anti-tank options, you'll only be able to keep your armor facing to one of them, and a savvy player will try and hit you in the side. And when you do start hitting this in the side, it becomes eminently more possible to injure them because you get that +1. Like we said, +1 to damage. You go from being only able to glance it to being able to actually able to penetrate this thing. And if you can penetrate its armor, then it has to take the pins. It doesn't have a choice. And the moment you start getting pins on this, it's going to become less effective because it's going to take this -1 to hit modifiers. So it's very tough. And the super heavy armor, as long as you can keep it to the front, is going to make you almost nigh on invulnerable. HE is still a problem, although at regular you can get through it. But really, it's the casemate forward anti-tank gun which is going to cause you to potentially expose armor that you don't want to. You might end up taking more damage than you'd like. But moving swiftly on, we have the special rules, and the Jagdtiger's got quite an interesting one. The 128mm Pak 44 was almost as effective at long ranges as at short ranges, so it does not suffer the -1 penetration penalty when shooting at targets at over half range. It counts its full +7 penetration bonuses at all ranges. I really like this special rule because I think it allows you to use the Jagdtiger in its intended role, which is essentially a long-range, super heavy sniper rifle. You're always going to have the advantage over enemy tanks. You will have the range advantage because they'll probably be armed with medium or heavy anti-tank guns, and you will have super heavy anti-tank gun, and you're always going to have the penetration advantage because they're going to have to fire most of their shots at you from over half range, and likewise you might be in the same boat, but you're always going to have the better penetration. So it just means that if someone is sending a medium tank at you and an armored car at you, probably, I know we were talking about getting outflanked and stuff, but if you have this thing well back in good firing arcs covering some important objectives or points of the mission, it can just deal with one at a time. First 2 or 3 turns, it has to get the shots to hit, of course, but if it does, it's going to go through the front, out the back, and probably take half the crew with it of the enemy vehicle. And then that flanking armored car that's trying to do something to you, you just turn around and do the same thing to that. I mean, it will auto-penetrate most armoured cars. Anything that's toughness 7 or toughness 8, obviously a roll of a 1 always fails, but you'll still be penetrating those things on a 2+. And that is a lot of vehicles. That's most armoured cars. That's a lot of the smaller, lighter meta vehicles that we've talked about. It's just massive overkill. But there is no kill like overkill. But even if you encounter something a bit heavier, you know, the British are want to bring a Churchill tank because it's in their starter army. And Russians, well, they love their IS-2s. Well, you're still going to have very few issues with just destroying these things. Because at long range, you'll be able to get a damage value on them 66% of the time on a 3+. Whereas if they shoot you with a heavy anti-tank gun at their long range, then the best they can do is get a glance. So it just is a very effective rule when used right. The only, I guess, disadvantage with it is terrain. Obviously, if you are using your Jagdtiger in this manner, if you're playing on a terrain-heavy board, you may not have the luxury of sitting back and sniping with it. But in my experience, you tend to find by action that there's a lot of terrain that gives like -1 to hit or -2 to hit, but there's not a huge amount of pure line of sight blocking outside of buildings, like a small village in the map. So you should be able to set your Jagdtiger up in most games, covering at least one important point of the board where it can kind of happily dominate and do what it wants to do. And then naturally, of course, being a tiger, it has the Tiger Fear special rule, which does go somewhat at odds with wanting to sit back and snipe with it, because Tiger Fear really works within 18 inches. But it does mean that if something goes horribly wrong, or the Jagdtiger starts getting swarmed, or the mission you're playing means it is going to get hit quickly and up close and personal, at least it's got Tiger Fear that might help start messing with your opponent. But I would say, number one, you want to be looking at this thing from the point of view of the gun and less of the Tiger Fear. Now that just about covers all of the cost and weapons, damage value and special rules. And to be fair, we've heavily dipped into the pros and cons of all of those things already. So we'll just go a little bit further. We'll do a bit more of a deeper dive on some of the good, bad and ugly with this thing. Firstly, I'd say what's good about it is the super heavy anti-tank gun is very powerful, and it's one of the most powerful ones you can get because it doesn't have the less penetration over half range. I also think it's very tough. Certainly going to feel like you're going to have the biggest, hardest tank on the board. When your opponent puts their Sherman or their T-34 down, yes, that might be a slightly more efficient unit, but you're going to feel pretty happy when you've got this big Makov, Jagdtiger there. That's very, very cool. And that's probably one of the best things about it. It is a very, very cool unit. And this goes for pretty much all of the German big tanks. There is rarely, in a sort of standard 1,000 point or 1250 point game, there's rarely a good tactical or strategic reason for including these things in your list. But there is absolutely many reasons, many rule of cool reasons to put this thing into your army. And it depends what you want to get out of the game. If you want to just have a fun unit that looks good and you just drive around with your big old tank, then the Jagdtiger is definitely. However, it does have some serious disadvantages. As we said, the casemate super heavy anti-tank gun does mean that it can be outflanked. Only having the one MMG means that it's going to lack the ability to cut down infantry, and bolt action is an infantryman's game. And I think the main one, of course, is the cost. 560 points is frankly prohibitive in a normal game. If you're looking at 1,000 points, which is what seems to be pickup game standard or tournament standard, not always, there's a lot of variation, but it's a good baseline to aim for. You're going to be spending 56% of your army points on this thing. That's not, and then you've got to have your mandatory officer, which will be 50 points. So just taking this and the officer you have to take is going to cost you 610 points. And then you've got the 2 infantry squads that you have to take. Yeah, you'll be lucky if you can get 7 or 8 dice. And those dice aren't just fillers. You know, you've just taken like a chaplain and a medic and an anti-tank rifle team. You'll be lucky if you can get 8 good dice in a list that includes something like a Jagdtiger. So you'll definitely suffer from dice disparity. And so I would say the Jagdtiger is something that you might want to include at 1250. It's still going to be a huge chunk of points. You're still going to be at a disadvantage in terms of dice, but you won't be so fundamentally crippled in the points department. So I think this is a unit that if you're going to use it in a standard game, really you have to use it at 1250. But I would argue that even then it's quite expensive, and it's probably one of those units that you want to use in scenarios where points are less important. Maybe you're having a narrative game where your Germans are trying to stop the Allies from getting over a bridge. Maybe you're doing one of the campaign scenarios where, you know, one side has 1,500 points and the other side has like 2,000 or 3,000 points. That's when I think the Jagdtiger really shines, in those more narrative and those more campaign-based scenarios. Overall, it's a big, badass tank, but it's got a price tag to match it. But of course, all of this is just like my opinion, man. Let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Are you a fan of the Jagdtiger? How do you think it stacks up against some of the other super heavy tanks that the Germans can get? And would you include one in your list? And if so, how would you support it? Hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, don't forget to smash that like button and also subscribe to never miss an episode. Would you like to know more? If so, then please consider becoming a channel member or patron. By supporting the channel, not only will you be doing your part, but you'll also be helping me create more content for your viewing pleasure and unlocking a whole host of perks. You get everything from a badge next to your name, custom emojis, but the big one is access to the Mordian Glory Discord server, an online community with almost 2,500 active members. It's always popping off in the MG Discord. We've got channels for army lists, hobbying, tactics, stories, and even a pretty spicy meme section as well. For all you greenhorns that wanted to see the Mordian glory hole, today is your lucky day. And joking aside, I do want to say a massive thank you to all of the current channel members and patrons. You guys are amazing. Truly the lifeblood of the channel. I could not do Mordian Glory full time without the incredible and generous support of my members. So thank you guys so much. And last but certainly not least, I want to say a personal thank you to all of my top tier Patreons. These are the War Masters, and they have truly gone above and beyond the call of duty. So a big shout out to Bon Vert, Mad Larkin, Marcus Roberts, Mark Panconi, RJ Scorpion, Swordfish Trombone, John Stubbs, Nick Walsh, Diesel Fox, and August Varney. Thank you guys so much. Your incredible generosity is a massive part of how I'm able to do Mordian Glory full time, and it is a big driving force behind the channel. But I hope you all enjoyed today's video. Thank you for watching, and of course, as always, I'll see you guys next time.